Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, where in today's video we are going to be continuing My Hero Academia, The Dark Knight Returns. What if Deku was Batman, Part 6. As always, if you're new to the channel, or if you're a regular and you like what we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting staff to come out now and in the future. Where we last left off with our series, we began the events of the sports festival. Izuku, now being prepared, would manage to overcome the obstacles before him as he laid claim to the first place spot in the overall obstacle race. But now, as the next two parts of the sports festival are underway, and as we reach the climactic finish, who will be able to advance to the finals and lay claim to number 1? As Izuku must now overcome many of his classmates and their interesting abilities. But also, who is the dark organization that watches in the shadows? And what plans do they have not only for our heroes, but for the hero world as a whole? For all this and more, stay tuned as we now continue My Hero Academia, The Dark Knight Returns. What if Deku was Batman, Part 6. As always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. The next event to be decided would be the Cavalry battle. For the most part, Izuku had pretty good stock of his inventory of gadgets at his disposal. So now, it was simply a matter of putting together a team. However, Izuku's team would be a lot different, but a lot more of the same, albeit switching out one member for another. In this timeline of events, Izuku's partners would be Melissa, Tokoyami, and Hatsume. You might be wondering why Uraraka wouldn't partner with Izuku here in this story, and I'll briefly explain to you why. You see, when Uraraka was saved during the events of the entrance exam, it wasn't just Izuku that took part in her rescue. It was the combined efforts of both Izuku and Melissa, the two working together, that they had managed to save her from the 0-point robot, so they both took equal credit. Because of this, Izuku didn't stand out overly much, and also was because of the fact that Izuku didn't display the level of power that he did in the original story. Not that Uraraka was going to be distant from him. No, she still talked to him regularly, and they were good enough friends, but it was nothing that made them overly close. However, Izuku and Melissa shared a lot of keen interests. For one, they were both huge fans of All Might, and they both took their hero classes very seriously. Izuku learned a lot about Melissa, and Melissa learned a lot about Izuku. This being taken note of by their masters, All Might and Bruce, as they watched on, kind of being a bit reminiscent of when they would work together from time to time. For the most part, different teams were formed for the Cavalry battle, but some were a lot more of the same. Todoroki's team would consist of Momo Yaoyorozu, Dinky Kaminari, and Tenya Ida, while Bakugo's team would consist of Kirishima, Mina Ashio, and Ochako Uraraka. These three teams being the key ones of note after the Cavalry battle got underway. Izuku, coming in first, would have the highest total point headband worn on his forehead. Of course, what Izuku lacked in terms of overall power, he made up for when it came to his strategy and when it came to putting different people in position when need be. Because of this, Izuku was able to guide his team, helping them to avoid the dangers of those who tried to attack him, most notably being Team Bakugo and Team Todoroki. But Team Monoma was also making some moves as well. Izuku was observant, much more than the average hero. This was a trait that he had picked up from Bruce. He had to have it. After all, he didn't have a quirk, so having what he called quirk observance was the key figure. This was another part of Izuku's training, a part of what we call quirk psychology 101. It's not enough just to know what a quirk does, to know how it works, but you also have to anticipate the individual. For example, if you're dealing with someone who you could say has a quirk that wasn't overly powerful, but the person had a high intellect, then it was safe to say that this person could be very dangerous. But when you take, for example, the case of someone like Denki Kaminari, a quirk that in and of itself could be powerful, but when used in his hands, it wasn't applied in the best of ways, something that Izuku had picked up on. Denki's power would be better used in using powered up weapons or things of that nature, or at least in more of a support style role. Or he would be wise not to try to overplug himself with electrical power and thus short-circuiting his own brain, making him more of a liability than anything else. But it was taking note of Todoroki that was truly of Izuku's attention. You see, when Izuku went over many of Bruce's old case files and his rogues gallery of villains he faced along the way, many have stood out of note, one of them being the villain known as Mr. Freeze, who had an ice-based quirk, although it came with its own drawbacks. One of them being that his body had to be kept in a rather cool temperature at all times. Bruce explained that during his time of heroing, quirks were a lot more even out, to say the least. There was a lot more diversity in terms of the quirks, and a lot more parity. Or at least so to speak, the gene pool wasn't as condensed in today's era as it was back then. So a quirk like that had a lot of more drawbacks, including with the benefits. However, from what Bruce had seen from now the modern era, quirks were starting to become a lot more streamlined with the human body. An ice quirk 50 years ago might have been more detrimental to your body than today, and Todoroki was living proof of this, as his body wasn't overly affected by using his ice quirk. However, Izuku could tell that Todoroki was holding back. After all, he had made his declaration of war that he was going to win only using one half of his power, his ice. Picking up on this, Izuku would still be able to be observant enough, and what he was able to see was that even if Todoroki's body wasn't overly affected by his quirk, there were still drawbacks and limits to what he could do. One of the main issues being the fact that his body would over-freeze, and unless he found a way to regulate his body temperature, he was gonna run out of ice sooner or later. And it seemed as though his other side of his body, his flame side, was the one that he refused to use under any circumstances. Todoroki's team in the meanwhile would try to make multiple attempts at Izuku, while taking other headbands for themselves. They knew they had enough to win, but Todoroki, he wanted to take out Izuku himself. However, every time he tried to get close, using his ice in various maneuvers, Izuku was able to counter. Using his bat gauntlet gloves, he was able to break through the ice, as well as with the enhancement suit underneath his tracksuit. He was strong enough to overpower Todoroki to an extent, matching him in pace for pace, along with using a few of his other gadgets at his disposal. A few key battering shots were simple enough, striking Todoroki in the face and blinding him long enough for Izuku to attempt to grab a few of those extra headbands. Using the Bat Claw grappling gun, he was able to snatch at least a few 100 pointer headbands from Todoroki, as Todoroki tried to counter by creating a wall of ice to cut off their escape. However, this was where Melissa and Hatsume came into play. Hatsume with her rocket boots, and with Melissa using One for All Overflow at 10%. They were able to overcome the large wall of ice, with Tokoyami using Dark Shadow as their cover, blocking away against Denki and his electrical strikes, although it did do him some pain in the process. Bakugo in the meanwhile tried to focus on his team using overall speed and brute force, smashing straight through Todoroki's ice walls, Kirishima in the front using his hardening quirk, Uraraka making them weightless, while Bakugo would use his explosions to propel them forward, and Ashido would use her acid to assist in breaking through the ice. They too would clash with Todoroki's team, as they all entered into a three-way deadlock that continued on like this for a good while. Todoroki could feel that he might have been approaching his limit, and he tried to make one more desperate grab towards Izuku. However, Izuku had anticipated this happening. But the one thing that could still catch him off guard were the quirks of the other members of Todoroki's team, most notably Tenya Ida, who attempted to use his Recipro Burst in an attempt to give them the speed needed to outblitz Izuku, and for a brief moment it would have seemed like they had gotten to him. However, Izuku was clever enough. The moment Todoroki got close, Izuku would tell all of his teammates to get down, leaving Izuku in the air as Todoroki grabbed him by the collar. However, the moment that he had done so, and he had attempted to make a grab towards his headbands, Izuku would take the arm that Todoroki had used to grab him, before eventually flipping him over and throwing him back down onto the ground. Before he had a chance to get back up and make another go at it, he would feel something clinging to the side of his shirt. He would see that it was a glue bomb that would go off and leave him stuck in place with his teammates as they attempted to help get him out of it, as the time clock would go down and the battle would be over. With the cavalry battle coming to an end, there was now only one final part of the sports festival, that being the one-on-one tournament that would be fought out between the top 16 students, or the top 4 teams of 4. Izuku's team, Todoroki's team, and Bakugo's team would all advance to the finals, with a special 4th team being made of students from both Class 1A and 1B. The team was made from Kendo, Tetsu, Shiro, and Ojiro, although for some strange reason, Ojiro would drop out, meaning that the student with the next highest points would make his way into the tournament, that being Shinso. Midnight would announce the bracket, and it would come out as follows. In the first round, Izuku would face Shinso, Shiro would face Hatsume, Todoroki would face Uraraka, Melissa would face Mina, Kendo would face Momo, Ida would face Bakugo, Tokoyami would face Dinky, and Tetsu would face Kirishima. There would be a brief reprieve before the start of the finals, and the students would take the time to prepare themselves. Izuku, as he was walking about, wondered if he was going to get a chance to meet with Master Bruce, to see if there was anything that he could learn, or if there was anything he would have noticed that he were doing wrong before the start of the next match. However, as he made his way through the halls, he would be stopped as a woman would stand in front of him. Izuku almost didn't recognize her, until he looked closer and realized that with her red hair and her glasses, it was obviously Kelly, who had come by to find him. Kelly, it's you! Hey there, Izuku. You've been looking good out there. Oh, really? Thanks. To be honest, it's been pretty touch and go for a while now. I can't believe I've actually made it this far. I can, of course. You were trained by the best. You're ready for this. Hey, you went to UA too, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Graduated in top of my class. Even without a quirk? Yeah, it can be done. Granted, it's very difficult. Wow, you must have had some pretty impressive heroes in your class. Yeah, you know a few of them in particular. Mr. Gloomy Eyes, the guy that's been doing the announcement. Mr. Aizawa? He was your classmate? Mm-hmm. So was Present Might. We were part of the quartet, if you will. A quartet? Yeah. Me, Present Mike, Aizawa, and our other friend, the four of us, we were always together when we were younger. Wow. What happened to your fourth friend? I'll tell you about it another time, okay? You just make sure you're ready for your match. Will do. As Izuku was leaving off after seeing Kelly, he would overhear a conversation from off in the distance. It was between that of Todoroki and his father. His father, that being the number 2 hero Endeavor, was not all too happy about how his son was performing, and that he was holding back, although Todoroki gave no cause or care for the words of his father. As Izuku decided to leave them be, he would be approached by Melissa, who would wish Izuku luck in his part of the bracket. If everything played out, they might even meet in the semifinals. Izuku nodded. As he smiled, he wished her good luck in her match as well. The two giving one another a fist bump before making their way to their respective areas. While Melissa would be waiting in the stands, Izuku's match was going to be first. However, as he was leaving and preparing to make his way towards the open door for the arena, he would be stopped by Ojiro, who would give him the same warning as before, of Shinzo and his quirk. On one hand, Izuku didn't like the idea of getting the warning like this. After all, he wanted an opportunity to show what he could do without having foresight. But at the same time, seeing as how Ojiro had his spot pretty much taken from him by Shinzo, I guess this was Ojiro's way of getting revenge, so Izuku could understand it at least. As the tournament began with the first match, Izuku would face off against Shinzo. Shinzo tried to get Izuku to answer to his questions, or to him in general. However, no matter what he did, he would not get an answer from Izuku. Izuku, however, would stay focused, instead blitzing him from across the arena, delivering a swift series of kicks and punches before launching him out of the ring and getting the victory. It didn't take Shinzo long to realize that Izuku must have gotten a warning on his quirk. It caused him to sputter in anger. It's no fair. How did I lose to someone like you? It just proves how worthless my quirk is. Izuku turned back to him. Your quirk isn't worthless, Shinzo. It's actually quite powerful. Yeah, right. I'm serious. Just think to yourself, have you really given it everything you have? What? You heard me. It's taken everyone everything they've had to get here, not just you. I don't even have a quirk, and yet I'm in Class 1A. You have a quirk, and you're in Class 1C. Do you really think that it was a matter of just who does and doesn't have a power? It's about the work that you put into it. Even the weakest of quirks can become the most dangerous if they're used in the right way. I believe you have the talent. You just have to be willing to go the extra mile. Shinzo was left with a lot to think about. Of course, he wondered if, with his quirk, if he could actually make a difference. But, unknown to Shinzo, there was someone watching him. Someone who thought that he could have potential, if it was pushed in the right direction. The other matches all played out in their own unique way. Zero, in this match against Hatsume, was a bit more anticlimactic to say the least. He just had a bunch of gadgets slapped on him and he found himself running around the arena, pretty much being used as a model for her test projects. And once she had shown off what she wanted to show, she pretty much just bailed out of the ring and gave Zero the win. Todoroki vs Uraraka was also captivating. Uraraka using her anti-gravity quirk, causing all of the ice and debris to hover above Todoroki. Unlike in her match against Bakugo, Todoroki isn't the fastest on the ground. As such, he was even more caught off guard when all of the debris started to fall on him all at once. It could have potentially been a disaster if it wasn't for the fact that Todoroki had one thing up his sleeve, and it was something he wasn't all that proud of. Without even thinking about it, he launched a large burst of flame, burning away everything that came towards him. It caused him to have to catch his breath for a moment, as it took a lot of fire to burn everything to cinder, or to melt away all the large chunks of ice. Uraraka attempted to make one more go in the smoke towards Todoroki, trying to touch him so that he would float out of the ring. However, Todoroki simply created an ice wall, too big for Uraraka to overcome, and knocking her out of the ring to get the victory. While he had won, Todoroki was now more angered at himself than before, mainly because of the fact that he had been forced to use his flame quirk, something he wasn't too keenly happy of. Melissa's fight against Mina Ashido was also entertaining enough. Using only 5% of her power, she was able to move fast enough to avoid the attacks of acid, before eventually grabbing her by the collar and, politely as possible, tossing her out of the ring. Of course, there were still a few bumps and bruises, as Melissa had to learn to control her strength, but still, she did good enough to get this far. One match that was truly exciting to see, though, was Kendo versus Momo. The two of them proved to be a good counter for one another, and they could see a potential rivalry starting to brew. Kendo, with her enlarged fist as well as her skills in the martial arts, fighting against Momo, who was able to create just about anything she needed for the situation, from shields to various hand weapons to anything else that she could think of. The battle went back and forth evenly enough, although Momo would eventually be able to get the win though, just narrowly outsmarting Kendo and knocking her out of the ring. The next fight would be one of high fury, Ida versus Bakugo. Ida attempted to speed blitz Bakugo, delivering a series of kicks and strikes to try to take him down. However, Bakugo only got more angered the more times he was hit. Ida attempted to go for the Recipro burst, nearly missing Bakugo's own head. Although Bakugo did like the intensity and he gave it back tenfold. You see, while Ida was good on the ground, he wasn't so good in the air. In a scene that you could almost say was reminiscent of another show in another anime tournament long gone, Bakugo would use an explosion. Grabbing Ida by the collar, he used his explosion to send them high into the air, before delivering a series of explosions, causing massive kicks and punches to Ida. You could say this was a version of the exploding barrage, Bakugo style, before Ida was knocked unconscious, as with the final attack, Bakugo would create a move, one reminiscent of a certain pro wrestler, for those of you familiar with WWE. As Ida's head was about to collide with the ground, Bakugo would place his foot on the back of Ida's head, before using his explosions to blast them straight into the ground. This was what Bakugo called the TNT curb stomp. Ida's face went crashing into the ground, leaving him with a broken nose and a broken pair of glasses, and leaving him out cold, with Bakugo getting the win. The next matchup was Tokoyami versus Dinky Kaminari. Dinky's electricity was actually able to do some damage against Dark Shadow. However, Dark Shadow was able to overcome this charge of electrical surge, and mainly due to the fact that when Dinky used this power, it left him almost completely inebriated afterwards, causing him to be knocked out of the ring and for Tokoyami to get the victory. And then finally, there was Tetsu Tetsu versus Kirishima. This match going about the same as it did in canon, with Kirishima getting the win and advancing to the next round. In the next matchups, Izuku would face off against Zero. Zero attempting to fight seriously against Izuku. Using his sticky tape, he would bind him up and try to swing him out of the ring. However, Izuku would use the blades on his back gauntlets to break himself free. cutting through the tape as he used a batarang attached to the end of the bat claw. Tying it around Zero's own legs, Izuku gave him the same treatment, attempting to swing him out of the arena. Although Zero was able to swing onto a pole before going back into the ring and not falling out. However, the moment that he landed back into the arena, Izuku had already blitzed him and was ready to deliver a powerful volley of combo strikes. While Zero had a rather unique and versatile quirk, it wasn't anything that Izuku couldn't overcome with a simple form and a flurry of martial arts. Bruce watched on from the stands, immensely proud of Izuku's performance. He wasn't wasting his movements or his time. He was able to move fluidly and with a purpose, each strike having meaning, as he was able to defeat Zero and advance to the semifinals. The next matchup would be Todoroki versus Melissa. It hadn't been lost on Todoroki about Melissa or about her power. He was able to take note that it was a lot similar to All Might's, and it only gave him all the more incentive to win, especially with who would be waiting in the next round. Melissa, however, was not one to give up, and unlike in the original timeline, Melissa had had a few years of training under her belt before she entered UA, just to try to get a hold of her power and how far she could push it. She already had Overflow at 10% max, which was well enough to combat Todoroki's ice. It left Todoroki on the back foot for much of the match, but Melissa was the one to reach Todoroki's heart. You see, more so than Izuku, Melissa was in a way trying to understand Todoroki. She didn't want him to carry the baggage or whatever was holding him back. She really wanted him to give it his all, because she wanted the same thing. Melissa had been fighting for this. She had grown up without a quirk. It was only because of All Might she was given this opportunity. A big responsibility weighed on her shoulders, to try to live up to the next symbol of peace in her own way. For Melissa to do this, she had to test herself against the best. She couldn't afford to hold back against just anyone, and she couldn't let them hold back against her. No matter what the result, she wanted to know that she was truly going all out, and she wanted Todoroki to do the same, knowing that this power belonged to him, and him alone. It was a power he could use to save lives and make it into his own way, and that he didn't have to use it for what anyone else wanted him to. These words were encouraging enough, as Todoroki decided to give it his all. The two of them colliding in one final charge, as Melissa tried to use a devastating jet stream smash, colliding with Todoroki's immense flame and ice. The explosion would blow back the two of them, Melissa tapping a bit more into the overflow, going into around 12 to 15%, and Todoroki matching her response in kind. As a result, the both of them would be blown out of the arena, as Cementos had to try to create more barriers to stop the aftershock of the attack from doing any more damage. The result being that the two fighters were knocked out of the arena, resulting in a double KO, meaning that the both of them would be counted out, and that Izuku, by no fault of his own, had actually managed to advance to the finals somehow. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with this outcome, but at the same time they couldn't deny the talent that had been shown. In the meanwhile, in the next two matchups, Bakugo would face off against Momo. The fight was interesting to say the least. However, Bakugo was able to win with overwhelming force, knocking her out of the arena, and with Bakugo getting the win, advancing to the semifinals. And then finally, there was Tokoyami versus Kirishima. Dark Shadow was definitely powerful and not something to be underestimated. However, Kirishima had only gotten stronger from his fights from before, and he wanted another shot at Izuku. As such, he was able to overpower the strength of Dark Shadow, eventually wrestling it into submission, forcing Tokoyami to have to get involved, and only for him to be struck down as well. It was definitely a gritty victory, but Kirishima advanced. Of course, since Izuku was already having a spot in the finals, there was debate for what to do with Bakugo and with Kirishima. That was until the idea was floated to just have a three-way deadlock, or a sudden death, if you will, for the finals. The offer was given to Izuku for what he would want to do, and never wanting to deny himself a challenge, Izuku would agree. And thus, the finals of the tournament would be a triple threat: Izuku versus Bakugo versus Kirishima. All three combatants would be in the arena at the same time, and the last one standing would win. Bakugo was more than eager. He could take the both of them out and get the victory. For Kirishima, he got another shot against Izuku. And well, for Izuku, now was the time to show everything that he had learned. As Midnight would yell for the match to start, Bakugo would go charging towards Izuku. However, Izuku was ready for this. Being down to about 20 batarangs left, Izuku would take 5 in each hand, throwing them all specifically in various locations, as the batarangs would bounce off of one another in the air. By the time Bakugo had closed the distance between the two, the batarangs had bounced off of one another to a point where a few of them were now about to hit him in the back. However, Kirishima would take those hits, his body already being hardened to such a degree that he could shrug them off. Before Bakugo could even see what had happened, Kirishima, who had now moved fast enough to get behind Bakugo, would grab him and put him into a German suplex, slamming him into the ground, before attempting to do the same once again, delivering a series of German suplexes. Bakugo could feel that his head was ringing, and as Kirishima got up, Izuku would have his boot colliding directly to his face. However, Kirishima would also respond by countering with a punch to his gut. Izuku surprised as how much more it could hurt without his protective armor. Of course, he realized that was probably a bad decision, and Bruce would agree, stating that he had to be more careful than that, and that he was going to be feeling that hit tomorrow. Izuku felt himself keel over for a moment as Kirishima went to try to go to work on him, but as he raised his fist into the air, Bakugo would smash an explosion towards his left side, knocking him over in the other side of the arena as he went lunging towards him. As he jumped into the air, he delivered a volley of kicks along with explosions himself, attempting to overwhelm Kirishima with his pure and raw power. However, Izuku was not one to be left out of the fray either, as he used one more of his batarangs tied to his bat claw. He tried to wrap the both of them up, trying to hold them in place as he attempted to use his glue bombs to hold them. He only had 3 left, but surely that could keep them all globbed and stuck together and he could get the win that way. However, as they came flying towards them, Bakugo used his free hand to blow them all up, the explosion colliding with the gluey substance, causing it to melt in midair before grinding to the ground. As both Kirishima and Bakugo would break free, they would engage in their fight once more, although now Izuku was starting to get into the mix. The crowd was cheering and roaring. They had never seen anything like this before. Bakugo, Kirishima, and Izuku, all 3 of them fighting at once. Izuku was taking damage left and right, but he was still able to dish out punishment of his own. Deciding that now was the time to use the cachet ball, he would take the ball from out of the compartment of his belt, the nanotech transforming into a weapon that he could use, and he decided to go with the bow staff. As many were watching in the stands and on their TVs, a certain hero was watching how Izuku fought with the bow staff, as a small smile creeped on his face. He remembered fighting in a similar way, and it was nice to see that some tradition had lived on. Izuku, using the bow staff, he would work to keep the two of them at a distance, keeping it on defense while also striking with his offense as well. Bakugo attempted to close the gap once more, but Izuku would transform the bow staff into a shield, blocking away the explosion and knocking Bakugo up, before transforming his weapon once again into a pair of nunchucks, attempting to grab Bakugo and hold him in place once more. However, Kirishima would come bawling at the two of them, attempting to knock them both down as he was one left standing. As they both got back to their feet, Izuku could feel that he was being worn down. Maybe a rib or two might be broken. It was definitely taking more damage than it was worth, as he switched his weapon over into that of a pair of knuckle busters. Bakugo was still standing, ready for another flurry of attack, all three circling one another. The stands were electric and the people were on their feet. Izuku had already fought against Kirishima. He wondered if he could have improved from his weakness so quickly, but then there was Bakugo. Bakugo and Izuku looked at one another, then Izuku to Kirishima, and then Kirishima to Bakugo. Izuku went in for the strike. As he went in, he tried to sweep the legs of Kirishima. However, he was able to do a backflip and jump over the attack, only for Bakugo to come flying in and delivering an explosion towards his back, while Izuku delivered a kick to the front. It seemed that it turned into a 2-on-1 fight, with Kirishima trying to fight the two of them from either side. Of course, he didn't like the idea of them both trying to gang up on him, but if they felt the need to do this, then he must have been truly worth his weight. As the fighting continued on, Kirishima tried to fend off the both of them, but eventually it proved to be too much. Izuku would deliver an uppercut before Bakugo would come flying in. With howitzer impact, Kirishima would be blown out of the arena, now leaving only Bakugo and Izuku. It was only going to be a matter of time. The two friends now smiled. This was what they had wanted. This is how they wanted this to end, with just the two of them. Izuku held out his hand, and he ushered for Bakugo to come forth. Bakugo obliged, as he would use the stun grenade, attempting to blind Izuku long enough to blow him out of the arena next. But even with his eyesight taken from him, Izuku was still able to hold his own. The two of them colliding with a flurry of punches and kicks. It was starting to become a test of strength, a battle of will. Only one was going to win this fight. One would claim victory, while the other would taste defeat. Between the two of them, Bakugo was definitely stronger. But Izuku had one way of gaining the advantage. Using every remaining smoke bomb he had, he would throw them in the center of the ring, causing a large puff of black smoke. No one could see inside, and for them, they couldn't see out. Bakugo's vision was completely cut off from him. He looked around trying to find Izuku, trying to be careful not to step out of the ring. But still, with his vision now being completely shut, Izuku took the advantage. As he used the shadows, he would sneak Bakugo from every direction, striking him in the back, a kidney shot, a gut check, a right hook, sweeping the leg, and then delivering a series of blows. Bakugo tried to rain his explosions to try to blow away the smoke, and the moment that a path cleared, the last thing he saw was a boot, smashing him directly in the face and knocking him right out of the ring. As the smoke started to clear and as the dust started to settle, there was only one person left standing, and that was Izuku Midoriya. The crowd would give an applause. Many were in absolute shock. The boy without a quirk, fighting with nothing but his mind, his intellect, and his gadgets, he had managed to win it all. As Bakugo slowly got to his feet, he was very pissed, to say the least. The fact that he had actually lost to the nerd, he couldn't believe it. But at the same time, he had to accept it though. Everything Izuku had done, he did with his own strength. He worked and improved. Of course, Bakugo now had 10 times the incentive. He wasn't going to be settling with this setback for long. He was going to make a comeback. But still, at least for today, Izuku had earned his respect. The final battle was little more than placement for the top 3 spots. As Kirishima was eliminated first, he would come in 3rd place. Bakugo was taken out 2nd and he came in 2nd place. And with Izuku being the last one standing, 1st place was claimed for him. All Might would have to go into his buff form as he came out to present the awards to them all. As Izuku looked out into the stands, he would see up in the press box his master applauding in approval and with the faintest of smiles on his faces, along with Carrie, who was also pleased. As now word was spreading of the sports festival and of its climactic finish, elsewhere there was another situation taking place. The one known as the hero killer had struck once again, now leaving the hero Ingenium lying in his own pool of blood down in an alley. You see, the hero killer was on a mission to rid the world of its false heroes. And the only one that he wanted, the only hero that truly held his respect, were the ones of the past. All Might and the Bat. However, the Bat had long since retired, and All Might was now the only one left standing. But even still, until the time came that a hero that he deemed worthy would put an end to his horrid deeds, he would continue his purging of the hero world. However, this hero killer had caught the attention of many, one in particular who wanted to use his skills. A certain league, a league of assassins. This concludes What If Deku Was Batman? My Hero Academia, The Dark Knight Returns, Part 6. As always, if you enjoyed today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue Dragon Ball World's Strongest. What if Wonder Woman was in Dragon Ball Part 6? But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.